Hi, it's Laura at Aquamarine 18 Tarot and Books. Thanks for stopping by my channel today. Welcome or welcome back. In this video, I want to offer some food for thought with respect to the topics of kind of low buy, no buy that are of course making their rounds in the tarot community right now, as well as, bringing that into conversation with tarot ethics. I am inspired in part here by a video made by Cassandra over at Riffle in Time. I'll link her video in the description box below. And her video is called something like Why I'm Not Doing a Low Buy. And in that video, she talks about wanting to be really intentional and deliberate about where she puts the resources that she has. So she talks a little bit about kind of boycotting, where that makes sense, but also talks a lot about supporting small businesses and wanting to support artists who want to get their vision out in the world and things like this, right? And I appreciated that contribution to this kind of set of conversations because I feel like it shifts emphasis, in terms of what one's spending is actually doing, like out in the world, and how it is affecting people other than oneself, right? And I think that that's an important thing. And I share several of Cassandra's thoughts, and I want to share three questions that I've come up with. Three questions that one can ask, inspired by this idea of being intentional in one's, in this case, debt collecting, but this is, also obviously more broadly applicable than just that. Questions that one can ask oneself. And I don't present them as exhaustive. I don't suggest that they all have correct answers. I don't suggest that they all have one correct answer, or that this list of questions couldn't be much longer. But, these are some questions that I think it might be really good to have more conversation about in the context of tarot community, right? In the context of, talking about debt collecting and these kinds of themes that we spend lots of time talking about. I think that these are some topics that are sometimes underemphasized in my view. And so I want to bring some attention to them and invite thought, right? Invite consideration, invite conversation, in the comments is welcome. So these are three questions that are about thinking about the impacts of one's purchasing. I promise I'm going to stop rambling in the introduction in a second, but, before I get to the three questions and ramble about what they might involve, I do just want to say at the outset, obviously, perhaps not obviously, I don't present these questions to suggest that we can ethically shop our way out of the destructiveness and violence of capitalism. I don't think that that's possible, right? I don't think that reforming capitalism is possible. I come from a fundamentally anti-capitalist standpoint. I also think that in the here and now, it feels important for me, when I'm thinking about words of the year like alignment, or, I'm thinking about personal philosophies and spiritual practices and all of these kinds of things. It's important for me to think about the impacts of my actions in the here and now. So that is the perspective that this is coming from, or at least part of it. Question number one, and I just wrote down three questions on a piece of paper that's taped right there. Question number one, what kinds of wealth distribution do my purchases contribute to? This is, I think, a big part of what I got from Cassandra's video, right? Thinking about, for example, choosing to support small businesses over supporting major, massive corporations, right? And this is just kind of reframe of that. What kinds of wealth distribution do my purchases contribute to? Does the way that I'm purchasing this thing further concentrate resources in fewer and fewer and fewer corporate hands, or does it distribute resources more horizontally, right? I feel like thinking about wealth distribution this way could also mean thinking about things like whether a particular creator or shop, or business that one might be buying decks from, does that creator or shop support causes in their community or make contributions or donations to things? And if so, are those things that, that you support as well? My favorite tarot shop to visit in my neighborhood, or not in my neighborhood, it's like a couple of hours away, is a shop that basically funds the fact that the owners run a goat rescue, and I think that that's amazing, right? So that kind of thing would be relevant here too. Wealth distribution, what is that wealth doing? Is it possible to make deck buying or other kinds of buying decisions that shift resources into communities that are exploited and under-resourced, right? That would be a good consideration, I think, as well. Again, these questions are big, right? And I know that I'm not sharing everything that could possibly fall under these kind of umbrellas, but it's just a place to start. And something that I'm thinking about, when I'm thinking about deck collecting and things like this, right? And I just did the having a deck collection VR, and that also made me think about this too. Just a different angle. So yeah, question 1 is what kinds of wealth distribution do my purchases contribute to? Question number 2, what kinds of labor are required to support my purchasing decision? Question about labor, right? And obviously, depending on, let's say here, decks, that kind of question is going to be really complicated to answer depending on what kinds of decks we're talking about, right? Something like the Earth Mother Magic Tarot by Aishimiri Yashin is just one example. This is a very DIY, like hand-cut, hand-printed deck. The kinds of labor involved or required to produce this deck and get this deck to me are going to be different than the kinds of labor required to mass produce, right? And so what that answers to these kind of questions look like would be different in different contexts. I feel like asking questions about labor and what kinds of labor are required in getting, a deck to me also invites thinking about things like, can I request supporting unionized workers who work in shipping, right? Supporting unions is a labor issue, right? And the options that exist for shipping, which obviously, vary internationally. I live in Canada. I can only speak to, having things shipped to me and what options exist here. The options for shipping range really widely in terms of like the kinds of jobs that people have, the kinds of working conditions people have, the kinds of bargaining power people have who work for different options when it comes to shipping, right? Some of those jobs are unionized jobs. Many of them are not. Asking about the labor required to support, buying a particular deck could also look like, is it possible to avoid companies that we know engage in union busting, right? i.e. Amazon, right? That's a labor issue too. Is it possible to, add a deck to one's deck collection without supporting a union busting company, right? This is one that's important to me as someone who's had a lot of labor movement experience. It's hard, I think, to think about labor when it comes to something like tarot decks and oracle decks and deck collecting, because there's, I'm sure, a lot that we don't know in a lot of cases about the employment conditions, working conditions involved in like working for a particular publisher, working in a particular factory, working for a particular printer, can we ask about these things? Can we ask publishers about these things, right? Can we make demands of publishers? Can we ask that particular kinds of commitments be made to living wages, for example? I know that Mari, who created the Gentle Tarot, on her website talks about paying a living wage as a business owner. Right? She also talks about contributing to environmental causes. She has a lot of commitments that she has made with respect to how her decks are produced. Right? And one of those has to do with paying a living wage to people who work, for her or with her in getting her decks out in the world. Another deck that came to mind when I'm thinking about types of labor and labor involved in producing and getting something to me is the Lineages of Change Tarot. This is a collectively created deck. This is published by AK Press. AK Press is mostly a book publisher. They've been around for quite a long time at this point. They are a collectively run, worker-run publisher, which is interesting from a labor standpoint, right? So that's the second question. What kinds of labor are required to support my purchasing my collection? And again, this is a kind of question that applies to lots of things that are not decks, right? Certainly, I think, questions about kinds of labor involved are vital to be asking about crystals, right? And lots of other things as well. The third question that I want to offer, and the final one, is what are the environmental implications of my purchasing decision, of my collection, and so on, right? And the environmental implications could again be a lot of things. These are big questions. Mari donates money from her profits to environmental causes. The back of this Gentle Tarot says on it, 10% of the proceeds from this deck will be donated to ocean and climate change research. That's an environmental implication that doesn't exist with most decks, right? But does in that particular case. Environmental implications would have to do with things like dyes and plant-based dyes and inks. It would have to do with packaging, plastic-free packaging. Can we ask for plastic-free packaging to be, a more common option? It would have to do with things like shipping materials. A lot of creators now are doing things like specifying that they're using recycled packaging materials, or like compostable shipping bags, or recycled paper to pack items into the shipping box. Like that seems to be increasingly common. That's something. Shipping has environmental ramifications, right? Global shipping has environmental ramifications in terms of kind of transporting things. Are there ways that we can think of to try to mitigate those things, right? Sharing shipping, so that, one parcel instead of 5 is going to a particular place. Is that a thing that we could do? Of course, again, to take the example of Mari, like creators supporting environmental causes is cool to see. I also thought of a deck like the Magical Nature Tarot by the Sync Spirit Collective. This is a deck that really has a lot of environmental components built into its manufacture. This is a really cool deck too. It's on the Eco Herbage cardstock. I know MPC has the Eco Herbage cardstock. I'm not sure where else does, but it's basically a sustainable cardstock that's plant-based. The box is recycled for this deck. This is another one where the creator has worked with a printing facility that has particular kinds of environmental sustainability and also labor commitments in terms of how they operate. right? And that is, you know, up front when you buy the deck, that's a thing that you get to know about. Environmental implications of purchasing. So that's the third question. And again, I probably have not covered anything like everything that could be considered in a question like that. I feel like I'm kind of hitting on the most obvious things, right? The materials and so on. But environmental impacts could be a lot of other things. Environmental impacts could even be something like, you know, does a particular deck through its theme or through its guidebook or something like that, does it function to, you know, raise awareness of particular kinds of environmental issues? Does it function to further discourses on particular kinds of environmental challenges? Those are angles that we could take as well. I think to all of these questions, like what is the substance of the deck in the sense of kind of the artwork and the themes and the book contents, like what kinds of interventions do those make in discourses about environment, about labor, about wealth distribution? You know, we can certainly think of decks like the Next World Tarot or decks like this that make these like very particular kinds of statements, you know. And so that's another way that we could think about it. So I don't have a neat and tidy way to wrap this up. I should have thought about my conclusion before I started, but I do tend to just kind of go in a fairly unedited, chatty way when I make videos like this. So I suppose I'll just close by, again, you know, the three questions that I've put here. What kinds of wealth distribution do my purchases contribute to? What kinds of labor are required to support my purchases? And what are the environmental implications of my purchasing? These are questions that come up for me when I think about deck collecting, when I think about, you know, other adjacent types of purchasing that are related to, you know, my spiritual practice or my spiritual life. You know, certainly as a kind of practitioner of a nature-based path, as a druid, these are very present for me. As I think about, you know, certainly not wanting to, for example, be working with tools in my druidry practice that are severely environmentally destructive, for example, right? There's a matter of kind of integrity there, that it is a part of my spiritual practice and path to think about and to be constantly thinking about, you know, how I can shift, you know, my impacts on the, you know, on the earth, on the communities I live in, and so on. So thank you for watching. And thank you to Cassandra for your video. I really enjoyed it. I will look forward to chatting and discussion, and I will see you all again soon. Have a good day.